So good morning. I hope y'all are doing well. And I don't know how long this sermon will last because my voice is almost gone, but probably less than 4 hours. So, Demystified Disciple. That's kind of a strange title. But the reason that title is up there is I think sometimes when we start thinking in church about disciples, it's almost a mysterious kind of word because it's not a word that we use that often. You know, probably outside of church or out of church things, you can probably count on one hand how many times you use the word disciple in a week. I mean, we don't go around in everyday language talking about disciples. We talk about disciples when we're at church. So I kind of wanted to simplify the idea of what it means to be a disciple. Now, this word disciple, it occurs 261 times in the New Testament, but it's really heavily weighted to the Gospels, 233 times. In Acts, you only have 28 times. In Romans through Revelation, the word disciple doesn't occur at all. So you might think, well, it's not very important, but it is important because it is the very heart of what we're supposed to be doing as a church. Go, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to say, obey everything I have commanded, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. So if you look at Clarksville Highway Church of Christ, you know, churches always have taglines, right? I don't know why we need taglines, but every church has a tagline of something, some kind of mission statement. Ours is very simple. It just says, making disciples, because that's who we are. That's what we're supposed to be about. But kind of what is a disciple? The word comes from a word which means to learn something. So a disciple, very simply, is just somebody who is learning something or is being instructed about something. It was a normal word to use for an apprentice. Everybody kind of been an apprentice and learned a trade or learned something somebody else knew how to do? When Diane and I moved to Huntsville, Alabama for me to work at West Huntsville Church of Christ, when I got there were all these people in the church who played golf. And so they would ask me to go play golf. And I'd never played golf before. I didn't know how to play golf. I mean, I'd been to the driving range a couple of times in high school. You know how you go out there and just hit balls and you don't really have any idea what you're doing. And I thought, well, if I'm going to learn to play golf, I need to go see a golf instructor. I mean, that makes sense, right? You need to learn how to do something. So I went to see this guy to teach me how to play golf, and he never swung a golf club. He just told me what I needed to do. And I was so confused. Well, you're supposed to put this arm here and that arm there. You're supposed to turn this. I mean, I got so confused. I didn't have any idea what I was supposed to be able to do because he was just telling me. He wasn't showing me. Then I ran across this tape with this guy, Jim McClellan. And Jim McClellan was a golf instructor. I think Ray even probably watched this tape a time or two. And this guy was very simple. He said, look, I'm going to tell you 3 things about a golf swing. He said, you need to be high here. You need to keep your head still and be high when you get here, and then just watch how I do it and just copy me. Like, wow. He said, play this tape over and over. Just watch me swing a golf club. The more you watch me swing a golf club, the better you'll swing a golf club. And you know what? He was kind of right because I was watching an example instead of just hearing words. So I've told you this story before, but I can't come up with a better one, so I got to tell you again, okay? So sorry about that. Harry Dawson and I we're going to change a transmission from a manual transmission to an automatic transmission in my 67 Mustang. And I famously told Diane, hey, baby, it'll take about an hour. Everything that I do takes about an hour, right? About an hour. And it took 3 days, but it's going to take about an hour. So it won't take long, baby, about an hour. Well, here's the problem. We could have done it in an hour, except we didn't know what we were doing. We got the manual transmission out, and there was a pilot bushing in the back of the engine. If you know anything about engines, and you're supposed to get that out to put the automatic transmission in. And we thought, how do we get that out? So we hit it with a hammer, and we banged on it, and we tried to pull it out, and we looked at it, and we contemplated it, and Harry was a mechanical engineer, so we engineered on it for a while, and guess what? Wouldn't come out. So we had this old mechanic that we knew, his name was Perry, and we said, I said, let's call Perry and asked Perry, how do we get it out? And Harry, after many, many, many hours of us trying to figure it out, it wasn't my fault, babe, I promise. He said, well, let's call Perry. So we called Perry, and Perry said, oh, yeah, that's real simple. You pack that thing full of grease and get you something about the size of that hole, and you hit it, and that grease will pop it out. I said, that's simple. He said, oh, yeah, that'll work. Don't worry about it. Just do that. So I hung up the phone. I told Harry, I said, hey, this is what Perry said. Harry, mechanical engineer, said, that's not going to work. So we spent another day trying to get it out. Finally, I said, Harry, let's just do what Perry said. Let's try it. So we packed it full of grease. It got me something about the size of the hole of the pilot bearing, and I hit it with a hammer, and guess what happened? Popped right out. And I said, okay, Mr. Mechanical Engineer. No, I was just so happy it was out, I didn't say much. What's the point? The point is sometimes you think you're doing something completely right, and you're doing it completely wrong until you learn from somebody else there's a better way to do it. And that's what it means to follow Jesus. It's what it means to be a disciple. John, he just simplifies it for us in the book of 1 John. He says, the one who says he abides in him, that he remains in Jesus, ought himself to walk in the same manner as he walked. So Jesus walked in life this way, and if you want to be a disciple, then you continually walk the same way in your life as the way that Jesus walked in his life. And that's all being a disciple is. And so there's a couple of things about that. Disciples are formed. They're not just informed. There's a difference in that. Jesus didn't sit down and just say, hey, look, I've got a document for you to read, and you read this document and do exactly what it says in the document, and everything will be okay. That's not the way Jesus formed the disciples. And you can talk. It's okay. How did he form them? How did Jesus form the disciples? They followed him. They followed him. Like only on the weekends, right? Only on the weekends. Now, Jesus got a Saturday and a Sunday out of them. No, they followed him. They watched everything that he did. They traveled with him day and night. And that's the way you're formed by something. He didn't just send them some kind of letter. And so when you look at that, you have to ask just a kind of a simple question. And that's, they were formed because they were with Jesus. And who are you with? Who are you following? Who is forming you? Because something's forming you. You are being formed every day by what you read or what you listen to or the voices that you hear or what you watch on TV or what you listen to on the radio or social media. Any of you who get older, you go back and you think about a song that you really liked when you were younger, like when you were a teenager, and you go back now and you hear the words and you think, what was that? I never heard those words when I was growing up. But all of those things form us. They shape us. And I don't know what forms you. I'm hoping you're allowing Jesus to form you, because that's what it means to be a disciple. But you know what? It could be a parent or a spouse or a brother or a sister or a friend at school or a boss or a co-worker. I mean, it can be any host of people that you're listening to their advice and listening to what they say and listening to how they walk through the world. So what is it that molds your behavior and your thoughts? Anybody get tired of reading news? I mean, just get tired of reading the news. Sometimes I just get tired of reading the news. Every morning, usually, when I get to the office, I'll read three things quickly. Fox News, CNN News, because they're just totally opposites, right? So I'll read both of them. And ESPN, you got to know what's happening in the world of sports, right? and during race season, jski.com, where all the racing rumors come out. But you know what? Sometimes I just get tired of reading it. And I look at the direction our world is going and what's happening in our world. What do you read every morning? Did y'all notice anything I left out in that? So I said, you left out the Bible. You thought you were the preacher. Yeah. But I do. I read the Bible every morning. Why? Because it shapes our thoughts. It molds us. It's learning how to walk like Jesus. You can't follow somebody you don't know. So you have to know who Jesus is. You notice the disciples weren't too busy. They just weren't too busy to be called. Jesus shows up. What's Peter and Andrew doing? They're fishing. Now, they weren't catching much at the beginning, but they're catching a lot at the end, weren't they? You know, they could have just said, maybe we ought to just fish on that side of the boat from now on. And Jesus, I appreciate the fact that you called us, but it's a pretty good haul of fish. You know, we're going to make a little bit of money here. We probably ought to just stick with this fishing thing for a while. You know, the fishing season is just kicking off good. I mean, the crappie are just beginning to bite. So it's not a good time. It's just not a good time right now. We just need, you know, there are bills to pay. There's families to support. I just can't follow you right now. The fishing's just going too well. James and John, fishermen, right? When he calls James and John, who's in the boat with them when they leave? Dad. Dad, can you imagine that? Hey, Dad, you're going to have to clean the nets tonight, buddy. We're gone. Dad, like, you want me to get back over here and clean these nets? But no, they weren't too busy to be called. Matthew could have said, hey, it's just right in the middle of tax season, Jesus. And there's just so much going on. I just really don't have time for it right now. Do you ever find yourself too busy? I mean, just too busy. Now, I know you do, because I don't talk to anybody in this church that we don't say, man, we're just busy. Right? We are busy. And we are. We are busy. I mean, I understand that. But are you too busy? Are you too busy to be called? Are you too busy to give Jesus your time and your attention? I mean, just sit down and think for a minute. What is it that crowds your life? What is it that takes all of your time? Now, I'm not up here trying to make you feel guilty because you don't spend every day or part of every day working in some kind of church project. That's not what I'm talking about. Because I'm telling you that you're serving Jesus when you do some of the things that you do every day in your life, the way that you parent, the way that you behave at work, the way you do your job, the way you teach your children. I mean, all of those are parts of being a disciple. It's not just that we look and we say, well, if it's not church stuff, then it's not disciple stuff. That's completely messed up. The way you live your daily life, that's disciple stuff. That's why they traveled with Jesus. That's why Jesus didn't just need to see them on the Sabbath. He needed to see them every day because he needed to see how they carried out their daily life. So being a disciple of Jesus means that you know Jesus well enough that you see what he has done, and what you try to do with your life is you try to mimic the things that you've observed Jesus either doing or saying. You're just trying to be like him. And that means they prioritized Jesus. They were willing to answer that call. They were willing to say, I'm willing to follow you, Jesus, wherever you go. So, I mean, this is a tough verse, isn't it? I mean, how many of you read this verse and just kind of sometimes sigh and kind of shake your head? If anyone comes to me and does not hate, and say, okay, wait a minute, hate? Really? So in context, it means to love less, okay? Hate his father and mother, his wife and children, his brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. And anyone who does not carry his cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Wow, look at that list of people. For most of us, that's a pretty heavy list. For me, that's a pretty heavy list. I love my mother and father. I even love my in-laws. How about children and wife? How about children and wife? I'm telling you, children and wife, they're high on my list. Okay? Brothers and sisters, high on my list. My own life, How high is that on your list? It's okay, you can talk. Pretty high, isn't it? If you don't love Jesus more than that, you can't be a disciple. You talk about prioritizing something or seeing the importance of something. That's pretty important, isn't it? Do you love him that much? Do you love him that much? And here's the other thing about disciples. They're always in the process of learning. We've never arrived. And here's the kicker. You're not going to arrive. How many of you wish there was a subject that you knew the correct answer on everything? I mean, you were just an absolute expert. I haven't found my subject yet. You know, I keep working trying to find one that I know a lot about, and I'm thankful for YouTube videos because that's how I learned to do half the stuff that I do in my life. I don't know what you people did before you had YouTube videos. You had people like Perry who told you what to do and you ignored it. So that's what happened. Or you had somebody who showed you, right? But we're always in this process of learning. I don't really need to tell you this, but you need to hear it. If you already knew, you wouldn't need to learn. Right? If you already knew, but you don't already know. What we're trying to do as a disciple is we're trying to learn exactly what Jesus is like, and then we're going to mimic that. We're going to follow that. And we're always in the process of learning something new about who Jesus is and what he did. When Jesus came along and he was teaching, do you realize the disciples didn't always understand what Jesus was talking about? Do you realize that he would tell a parable and then they would say, I have no idea. I mean, I can just imagine. This is just Greg, okay? I can just imagine after Jesus tells some great parable and they're looking at one another over the fire that night and they're like, did anybody get that? Like, do y'all have any idea what he was talking about? And in the crowds it said he could not say anything to them without using a parable. But when he was alone with his disciples, he explained everything. He explained everything. And even at that, did they always get it? No, they didn't always get it, even after Jesus explained it to them. Here's my point with that. Don't get discouraged when you don't always get it. Don't get discouraged. Consistency is more important than perfection. Okay? And let me explain what I mean by that. Sometimes we don't do something because we're afraid we're not going to do it absolutely perfectly. Sometimes it's just better that we do it, even though the end result is not going to be absolutely perfect. And if you look at the disciples, they're following Jesus, but the end result ends up being perfect. But in the path, not everything that they did was perfect. How many times did Peter deny? 3. He didn't learn the lesson the first time? Right? It took him 3 times. And then even after he denied 3 times, do you think he was at least excited to see Jesus, right? He jumped out of the boat, swam to the shore. Think there's a little apprehension in him? When they got time for the cross, how many disciples deserted? All of them. Now, I got this little question about John because he was at least close to the cross, so he still deserted, but at least he kind of ended up back pretty close to where he should have been. Do you think that's what they had planned? No, it's not what they had planned. They thought they would go with him to death. James and John. Hey, Jesus, we saw somebody and he wasn't with us. You want us to call down some fire from heaven on him? No, they just didn't get it. They didn't understand. They didn't even understand the resurrection until after the resurrection had occurred. Did y'all realize that? Jesus coming along saying, look, I'm going to go to Jerusalem. I'm going down the cross. Going to be resurrected. They didn't get it. The point is sometimes it's okay if we don't get it, but we consistently follow him. That's what being a disciple means. So he illuminates kind of our daily walk. See, reading and learning about Jesus isn't about so you can come in here and listen to a sermon on Sunday. Sorry, but that's just not what it's about. Love your enemies. Is that just a Sunday thing? We love our enemies on Sunday, but Monday through Saturday, maybe not so much. No, you love your enemies. What do you do to somebody who mistreats you? You return it with kindness. What do you do with somebody who disagrees with you? You treat it with respect. The world is pushing for possession so we can have more and more and more and more, and Jesus says you can't serve God and money at the same time. You got to have your priorities set right. Jesus comes along at the greatest teaching moment probably in his ministry, and he gets up and he wraps a towel around him and he goes around the disciples washing feet. Why? Were their feet really that dirty? Was it about their feet even being dirty? No, it was about Jesus saying, look, I'm going to show you an example of what I want you to do is to be a servant of other people. So it's not that we just learn things about Jesus so we can come to church and sit in the chair on Sunday and feel good about ourselves. It's because it illuminates our daily life. It's who we're supposed to be. It's what we're supposed to be like. Paul comes along and he says, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. Anybody read that and kind of cringe just a little bit? Not for Paul, just for me. Could you say that? Could you go to somebody and say, I want you to follow my example as I follow the example of Christ? If you were kind of the book, how would you read? Now, I know some of you are shaking your head saying, well, I don't think I want anybody reading my book. All right? Now, we're a church, which means we're a bunch of sinners. So all of us have something written in our book we'd rather people not know about in our book? Well, absolutely, right? That's part of being forgiven. So we model Jesus. And by the way, why are there 4 Gospels? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Could have gotten it all in one? Probably. I think it's for emphasis. So you will understand how Jesus walked. Then you got Acts through Jude, this is how you live out faith in Jesus. And then you got Revelation, which is a hope that you hold on to. Are you being a disciple? Are you just learning from Jesus, just trying to walk through life the way that he walked? Because that's all a disciple means. Several years ago, we watched some Ray Vanderland tapes here. Excellent stuff, by the way. And the title of one of them was Walking in the Dust of the Rabbi. I don't know if you remember this illustration. I thought it was really good. But Ray was talking about what a disciple would want to do is he would want to walk so closely to the master that when the master kicked up dust, that the dust would land on the disciples' feet. That's pretty close following, isn't it? And I just ask you, do you want to follow Jesus that closely? Or are you following Jesus that closely? And if you're not following Jesus that closely, what are you following? If you're not trying to be like Jesus, who are you trying to be like? Because John said it really easy. The one who says he abides in him ought himself to walk in the same manner as he walked. Being a disciple just means you want to be like Jesus. But you can't be like Jesus without committing your life to him, without becoming a believer. See, because the disciple means something else, doesn't it? We're going to go make disciples in the world. So what is it that we're making? We're making people who follow Jesus. So is that you? And if it's not you, it should be. And why don't you make that happen today while we stand and sing?